Okay, good morning. Buenos días. Buen día. Buenos días. ¿Cómo están? My name is Caroline Eileen Fernandez. Me llamo Carolina Eileen Fernandez. O meu nome é Carolina Eileen Fernandez. And I will be the Master of Ceremony for today's event. Branberry, who is Research Associate at the Gaston Institute, and he will present a socio-demographic profile. And then he will be followed by Mr. Michael Bernardino, a PhD student who will also present a profile of Latinos in kindergarten through 12th grade in public schools.
It's great to be here, and I'm excited by the opportunity. New Bedford is an area of the state that I'm not familiar with. I live in Boston. We're very Boston-centric, right? And so it's a great opportunity for me to learn a lot today. I'm going to provide a demographic profile, and I'm going to try as hard as I can not to make any comments on it, right? That's for the afternoon. I want to make comments all the time, but I want to do a couple things first to place the slides I'll be showing in a context. Number one is the census in 1995 predicted by 2050 that 50% of the population of the United States would be non-white. Subsequently, we're down to about 2040 because we're trying to look at Massachusetts or New England, which is seen as predominantly a non-Latino white population, is a little bit behind the rest of the country, but this demographic shift is happening. Number two, we at the Gaston Institute try to do a lot of things. And as an economist, I'd have to criticize us because we put together Brockton, New Bedford, Fall River, and Taunton. Well, believe it or not, we put together 2 metropolitan areas because we aggregate counties because people commute to a major city for work. And people in Bristol County commute to Providence, Rhode Island, so it's part of the Providence metropolitan area, where Brockton is part of the metropolitan Boston because it's in Plymouth County. We're here today because we're looking at a region of the state, but this is very, very important because regions matter. And the region you are part of could be a bigger issue than the city yourself, and how regions cooperate together is really, really key for their success. There is no regional government. There is no regional government. And so if cities work together, they can really change a region. Number two, cities themselves, I'm going to use the technical language, don't reproduce themselves. But what I mean by that is where we live is a choice. Okay? And where we live is important because people either come to a city from another city, or they stay in the city they're born. They come to a city from another city. They come from a rural area in the United States to a city, or they come from another country, international migration. In our introduction, we see we're really kind of focused on international migration, but it's very, very important that migration is an internal migration. And so I moved from Little Rock, Arkansas. I now live in Boston. I had a major migration in my life. It changed my social networks, all the same things that many of the foreign-born would experience. Now, why did I come to Boston? I sometimes say it was for love, but it also was for economic opportunity. And so how cities attract people becomes very, very important, and success is one of those things that can do that. Okay, so that's kind of the general introduction. For all this information, it comes from the U.S. Census, where we'll be presenting today, these data come from what's called the American Community Survey. The census decided that the decennial census is too far apart. We're going to do an annual census, but the problem with an annual is we do a survey to do that, but we always don't get a large enough population. So the census aggregates a one-year estimate, which they call a point estimate, or a 3-year or a 5-year period estimate. This is going to be a 5-year period estimate, which is 2007 to 2011. So a little technical thing. So I'm going to start going through these slides. I'll go through them kind of quickly. They're going to be online, so that will be helpful for you. But I want to basically just make some key points on these, and I'm going to kind of go through put on my racing shoes. Number one is that we see in this region that the Latino population is a part of the larger population, is a small percentage. Last year we were in Lawrence. Lawrence is 70% Latino. We were in Springfield. Springfield is close to 40% Latino. And you can see here in New Bedford at 15%. Boston is about 20%, just to put you in comparison. So if you look at Fall River and Brockton, and even Taunton, these are very small, relatively speaking, Latino populations. And you can see the next group there is the predominantly non-Latino white population. In Brockton, you see there is a lot larger concentration of blacks, and then very small population of Asians, and another population which is a little bit higher in Brockton, because they have Cape Verdeans and Haitians who don't always fit into these categories very well, I presume, by looking at the numbers. And the same thing in New Bedford. Cedric and I were talking a little bit about how do people identify themselves with the native population, and they can fall into this other category, which is a little bit higher in New Bedford. Population change. If you look at population change, you'll see that as a whole, these cities are not growing. New Bedford from 2000 grew at 1.5%. Brockton basically had no population change. Taunton had a very small population decline, and Fall River had a 3.2% decline. The state of Massachusetts grew at about 3%, but we lost a representative in Congress, right? So that against the rest of the country, we're growing at a slower rate. But you can see the Latino population in these cities are growing, at a very, very high rate. What's declining then is the non-Latino white population. And so that's part of that demographic shift. The overall population is not changing, but the Latino and other non-white populations are growing. Interestingly enough, when you look at the Latino population in these four cities, it's predominantly Puerto Rican. We're a little bit different in New England and especially in Massachusetts. I do research with people in California, and they do research on Mexicans. If you look at most research in the United States, it's about Mexicans for Latino research. Here in New England, we've had a strong Puerto Rican population, and you can see here in New Bedford, almost 2/3 of the Latino population is Puerto Rican, and it's important then that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, not a foreign-born population, even though they may have migrated from the island, which is a major transition, as I said, but they're U.S. citizens. Quickly going through this again, look at the age of the population. Oh my God, the Latino population is so young. The future's in front of them. So this is median age, which means half the population is above the number I have there. So here in New Bedford, 24 years of age. So half the population are above 24 years of age, but half of the population are below. If you look at I will now be doing comparisons to the white population, and you will see that the white population is much older in Massachusetts. And one of the demographic shifts is we're an aging population. Well, the Latino population is making us much younger in the United States, and many of the foreign-born as well. And even Taunton at almost 20, age 20 of a median age for the Latinos. Okay, now let's start. Just one quick thing before we move on. Look a little bit. I don't have it right there, but I mentioned the foreign-born. The foreign-born population in Massachusetts is about 14%, but only New Bedford, at close to 20% of these cities, in Bristol County, has a foreign-born population above the state average. Brockton has a very high foreign-born population at 25%. Predominantly, the foreign-born population, as you know, is Portuguese, and still is. And if you look at ancestry as well of the whole population, almost half of or 40% of New Bedford has Portuguese ancestry. Okay, now we're looking here at some characteristics on education. Let's look first, we're going to do, this is a population 25 years and older. So this is half the population. And again, we don't know anything. By the census, by using these data, I can't tell you where these people received their education. They could have received their education in these public schools in these cities, but probably not because people moved a lot. But we see that the Latino population in these cities has low levels of education, right here without a high school diploma. Okay, here in New Bedford, half the Latinos, do not have a high school education. Uh, when you then look at the high school, having a high school education, or we also include here the GED equivalents, we see then that in New Bedford, 22% have the high school education. And you see that the Latino population in all these cities has a lower level of the high school or equivalents. And then we look at the four-year degree. I then, you notice I skipped, there's something called some college. I actually do skip that there for, just look at the four-year, you earn a four-year degree. Here in New Bedford, roughly, 9% of the population. So very low levels of educational attainment. If you look for the population as a whole in the state, statewide, a four-year degree, we have high levels of education, and roughly 39% of the population has a a college degree, and of the Latino population, 16%, almost 17% have a four-year college degree. Okay, one of the things that I think that we don't pay enough attention to is labor force participation. I said I wasn't going to moralize, but my father told me work, work, work. And guess what I do? I work, work, work. And why do I do that? Because my father worked, work, worked. And so labor force participation is very, very important. Because if people aren't working, then we start to raise different issues. And the biggest hit of the recession, yes, has been the increased unemployment, which we're going to see, but we've also seen a decrease in labor force participation. So people that have actually said, I quit, there's no job for me, which could be very problematic. Statewide, labor force participation is 67%, and the Latino is about 70%. We see here in New Bedford, both the Latino and the statewide, the non-Latino white population are below their statewide averages. This can be attributed to a number of factors. It could be attributed to a depressed economy. It could be because of the demographic profile. A younger population, that means someone's probably home taking care of children. And so oftentimes people are out of the labor market for that. And it could be because what we're doing in the United States is we're delaying so much. And so many times people, even if they're trying to get a job, don't get a job until they're much older, and almost into their late 20s or 30s. Unemployment, we see, I actually do the citywide averages here, but in Fall River, and this is of that 5-year period, so very important to look at this right here, that there's a 14% unemployment over that 5-year period, but the Latino population is much higher at 23%. Where people are working, we see the service sector is where majority of the people find their work. This is basically a transition that's been going on in the United States. We have moved from manufacturing to service. That can be both good or bad. There's a high wage service and a low wage service, oftentimes working within the same industry. I work in education. I make a good salary. People who clean the building where I work don't make a good salary. And so services can be very misleading when we look at that. And so we'll back this up with our next thing. We see then that the median household income. And so to say that these it's low wage services, we see here in New Bedford that the median household income for Latinos is a little over $25,000. Latinos statewide is $33,000, and statewide, the whole population, entire population, is almost $66,000 over this time period. Home ownership, looking at, if we participate in one of the reasons my father told me to work, 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 there'll be benefits for that. One of those we typically think of as home ownership. And here in New Bedford, the Latinos have a lower home ownership rate at 16.8% than Latinos statewide at 26%. But yet, even home ownership is a little bit lower in a place like New Bedford. Statewide home ownership is at 64%. We see a little bit of variation where in Brockton, your Latino population has a little bit higher home ownership rate. And the last thing we look at here is medical insurance. Medical insurance, we did medical insurance before the rest of the state. The country as our state, we're leaders in the country. And yet we see wide variation in this medical insurance. And we see here in New Bedford that the Latino population, almost 14%, don't have medical insurance, and by state law, right, they're supposed to. There are some problems with that law in the coverage, and a lot of it has to do with immigration status. But we see statewide the medical uninsurance rate is at 4.2%, and for Latinos it's 9.5%. So we see then here in New Bedford and where the Latino population is above, where in Fall River is about equal to the state, and Brockton, Taunton much lower. Okay, those are my slides. I try to finish on time. I'll turn it over to Michael, who will come up and do the K through 12 education.
Hi, my name is Michael Berardino, and I'm a PhD student at UMass Boston and a research associate at the Gaston Institute. I'm going to be going over the current and recent education snapshot for the 4 communities that we've decided to focus on: Brockton, Fall River, New Bedford, and Taunton. All of the information I'm going to be presenting on is publicly available data from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We are putting out more detailed profiles of each district. That's going to be available on our website soon. So if you want to know more details about each of these districts, then come to our website. I'm going to present these. This isn't a comparison. This isn't saying one district's better than the other. We just want to let you know what the current and recent education profiles of these communities are. So first, we're going to go over the demographic composition of these districts. And you'll see a lot of the same things that Phil just showed. For the overall districts, it's a little more, the Latino population is a little larger because we saw that they're younger. So this first yellow is the percent of the district that is Latino, and in the middle is New Bedford, and we see that 31% of the K-12 student population in New Bedford is Latino. This is higher than the state average and the highest in this region. This works out to about 4,000 students. We see in Brockton it's 14%, and that works out to about 2,400 students. Fall River, 20%, about 2,000 students. And then Taunton has the smallest Latino population at 11%. For these districts, the next category is white student enrollment, and we see that for Fall River, New Bedford, and Taunton, that it's predominantly white still. The one exception in this area is Brockton, which the largest group is the African American Black communities. This is African American, Haitian, Cape Verdean. So we see that. Then we see multiracial, Asian, and overall we see that Fall River, New Bedford, and Brockton are very diverse communities. These are some of the most diverse school districts in the state, especially when you look at the racial composition. So not only are these diverse populations, but what we've seen over the past 10 years is a demographic shift. So what we're going to see is the yellow is going to be the percent growth for Latino students, and the blue is the percent growth for white students in these districts. So statewide, we've seen that there's a 25% increase in the number of Latino students, while at the same time a 10% decrease in the number of white students. In Brockton, 8% increase in the number of Latino students, while a 22% decrease in the number of white students. Fall River has had the largest growth of Latino students, almost 50% increase, while a decrease in white students. New Bedford and Taunton. So taken together, it's pretty clear that the school districts in Southeast Massachusetts and statewide are experiencing a demographic shift over the past 10 years. As Phil talked about, the Latino students are a diverse population. We heard that predominantly it's Puerto Rican students. We don't have the information of the country of origin for a lot of these students, for these students publicly available. But we do know is the percentage of the students that are designated as limited English proficient, so that tests for English proficiency and receive services due to their proficiency. And we see that In Brockton, it's about a quarter of the students. Fall River, 22%. New Bedford, only 10% of the Latino students in the district are tested as limited English proficient, and in Taunton, 8%. So according to the state, the overwhelming majority of Latino students in these 4 districts are English proficient and therefore don't merit any other services. They're mainstreamed in normal classes. I think there's been some discussions about how accurate this is, and so that's something that we can perhaps talk about this afternoon. The characteristics of these students, one thing that in the education research that has impact on outcomes is the mobility of students, and what we see is that in these districts, Latino students are highly mobile, and the churn rate is the percentage of students that change schools during the year. And what we see is that both statewide, so for all these charts, I'll just say this, the far one is the state, then we have alphabetical order, Brockton, Fall River, New Bedford, and Taunton. So it's going to be the same for all of them. I know it's probably impossible to read in the back, but so we see in all these districts that the Latino students are more mobile than all students in the district. And this has an impact on outcomes. Next, we're going to talk about MCAS, and we've decided to focus on 3 MCAS tests. The grade 3 reading. The reason we're focusing on this is because grade 3 reading is an important transition. So when students leave 3rd grade and go to 4th grade, it's a time of transition when they go from learning to read to the 4th grade where you're learning from reading. So it's important that students are reading at grade level at the end of 3rd grade. We're also going to go over grade 10 MCAS scores, which are graduation requirements. Students are required to pass them in order to qualify for a high school diploma. So these are current pass rates. So these are the percentage of students that are performing at grade level at the end of 3rd grade in reading. First, we're going to look at all students statewide and in these 4 districts. And what we see is that statewide, about 60% of students are reading at grade level, which is an area of focus statewide. So this is something that's impacting all students. But we see that in Brockton, Fall River, and New Bedford, that the percentage of all students that are reading at grade level at the end of 3rd grade is below the state average. Taunton is closer to it. But now if we look at, the blue is all students, now we're going to look at the Latino students. We see statewide, almost half the percentage of students are reading at grade level at the end of 3rd grade. Brockton, slightly lower. Fall River, there's a substantial gap. New Bedford, the gap is a little bit smaller, and it's higher proportion than Brockton and in Fall River and then in Taunton. But still we see that there's a gap in all these districts. The percentage of Latino students reading at grade level is lower than the percentage of all students. If we want to look at these pass rates over time, just to get an idea of how 2012 compares to what we've seen in the recent past. This is the state, all students. So we're going to set this as the bar that we're comparing everything against. And that first line is Brockton. So we see there's some growth, but not substantial growth. Fall River, actually a decrease in the percentage of students that are reading at grade level. New Bedford, some increase, especially over the past 5 years. That's encouraging. And then Taunton, you see it's very volatile. So some of the gap with the whole state has been closed, but there's still a substantial gap with the state for Latino students in these 4 communities. Now jumping to the grade 10, there's MCAS every year, but we're going to skip right up to the 10th grade ones just so we have an idea of what percentage of kids are passing the test that is required to get a high school diploma. And first we're going to look at all students. So we see across the state about 88% of students are passing the English MCAS in 10th grade. Brockton, while they have the lowest for grade 3, you'll see that they have the highest for grade 10. Fall River, New Bedford, and Taunton. The 64% for New Bedford, so only 64% of students in New Bedford that take the grade 10 English test pass it. This is the 4th lowest pass rate of any district in the state. Now we're going to look at the Latino students. And what we see, with the exception of Brockton, that there's a gap in many of these districts. Brockton, what we actually see is the opposite, where Latino students in Brockton are outperforming the rest of the student body in that district, and their higher proportion of Latino students in Brockton are passing as compared to Latinos statewide. We see Fall River, there's a large gap in the pass rates for the English, and as well as in Taunton. Just to see how these look over time, this is statewide. We see Brockton, that they've really made large increases. Fall River, substantial increases. New Bedford, I mean, I think this is for Latino students only. In 2003, only 10% were passing the test, while now it's up to 60%. And then Taunton. So this is, while the last slide I think was a little discouraging, I think this is more encouraging about the trajectory of students. And this is while the district has been experiencing demographic shifts. So not only is the higher proportion of a larger number of students. The math pass rates are a little less encouraging. Again, we see the New Bedford, 42% of students that take the grade 10 math MCAS, the graduation requirement, passed it last year. And this is the second lowest pass rate in the state. And that's for all students. If we look at the Latino pass rates, we see that only 28% of Latino students last year in New Bedford passed the grade 10 math, which is required. You have to pass the English, the math, and one of the science, technology, engineering tests. So this means that these students have to retake the tests in subsequent years. Looking at the longitudinally, we see that Brockton has made great strides, closing much of the gap with all students. Fall River, there was large increases, and then the past couple of years there's actually been decreases. Similar pattern in New Bedford, where there seemed to be a plateau a couple of years ago, and then Taunton. So those are the MCAS results. These are important, whatever you think of the tests, these are requirements for students that they have to pass. So that's a snapshot of what's going on with the MCAS. Next I'm going to talk about graduation and dropout rates. So these are the 4-year cohort graduation and dropout rates. This is the percentage of students that start high school together and then either graduate within 4 years, or the percentage of students that start high school together and drop out within 4 years. This isn't the annual dropout rate, this is the cohort. So this is looking at all students statewide and in these districts, and we see that New Bedford has a graduation rate of 55%. And like the MCAS, and perhaps related, that this is one of the lowest graduation rates in the state. Looking at the dropout rates, we see that New Bedford also has one of the highest dropout rates in the state at 23%. So this is all students. So we'll look at Latino students only now. And we see that it's an even lower proportion of Latino students are graduating within 4 years, and a higher proportion are dropping out within 4 years. Statewide, Latinos have, among all ethno-racial groups, have the lowest graduation rate and the highest dropout rate. And while these rates have been improving, there still is a gap. Here we see that New Bedford has 31% of students are dropping out. Another alarming number is the 28% of Latino students in Taunton. Well, we saw on the MCAS scores that Latino students in Taunton were doing better than some of the other districts. Here we see a high dropout rate. So just to put these two together so we get some sort of comparison, all students are the blues and Latino students are the yellow and the orange. And we see that there are disparities in all of these districts as well as statewide. Just to look at these graduation rates over time, that's the state graduation rate. Graduation rate in Brockton over the past 7 years. Fall River, there's been improvement. New Bedford, we see it's kind of stagnant. In the past year, there's been improvement, but overall, it still remains low. And then in Taunton, also pretty volatile, the changes from year to year. Finally, I'm going to show you the percentage of high school graduates that enroll in a higher education. So this is only looking at the kids that actually finish high school. So keep this in mind that we're not talking about all students, it's just the students that actually finish high school. So we see statewide, Brockton, Fall River, New Bedford, and Taunton. And we see that, again, we see a disparity in college enrollment rates. And if you think about this on top of the disparity in graduation rates, that if we looked at the percentage of students that start high school together and actually enroll in college, that these two, the bars for each district would be even more dramatic. On the other hand, we could say that the kids that actually do finish high school in these districts, a high proportion of them do attend college, which is enroll in higher ed. Predominantly, they're enrolling in two-year community colleges, but this is still an encouraging sign. And I didn't include the longitudinal analysis of this, but it is the rates for Latino students has been increasing over the past 10 years. So just want to quickly go over, just look at the dropouts in New Bedford. One thing you might have noticed is that the percentages didn't add up to 100%. Because there's other options. The state keeps track of other options for students, so either graduating within 4 years, dropping out within 4 years. They also report the percentage of students that are still in school after 4 years, the percentage of students that are non-graduate completers, that's predominantly special education students, and the students that are getting their GED. So what we're seeing here is this is the state, and this is the graduation rate for all students. That's the graduation rate for Latino students. All students in New Bedford, and then the graduation rate for four-year graduation rate for Latino students in New Bedford. The next bar is the percentage of students that are still in school. And as you'll see, in New Bedford, after 4 years, there's a large proportion of students that are still in school after 4 years. So luckily, then we have non-grad completers, GED, and dropout, and we already saw the high dropout rate. So the state also reports the outcomes for students after 5 years in high school. So we went back a grade before to see how the outcomes were for students after 5 years. We see statewide, this is after 4 years, then we see what happens after 5 years. So a higher proportion of students, if you give them an extra year with an extra year of high school, are graduating statewide. This is just looking at New Bedford Latino students. So in the class of 2011, 21% of students were still in school after 4 years. So one out of every 5 students that started high school together was still in high school after 4 years. And we look after 5 years that adding that extra year, that the graduation rate goes up, but the dropout rate also goes up. So that's just a snapshot of the current and recent education profile of these 4 communities.